Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse. And this is my Maybe Midrash TBR video. In addition to going over my very small TBR for this readathon though, I'm also going to be giving you guys some book recommendations, fiction and nonfiction, for the readathon. In case you're coming to this new and you are wondering what Maybe Midrash is, so this is a readathon that I created for the month of May, and I'm going to be co-hosting it with Steve Donahue and Felicia from Little Prairie Library. I will link my announcement video in the description box below, as well as the announcement video from each of them. But basically what you need to know for the purposes of this readathon is that in the month of May, if you want to participate, you've got to read a work of fiction that deals with religion in a serious way, and a work of nonfiction that deals with religion in a serious way. I am encouraging readers to steer clear of fiction that is published within the Christian publishing industry. So, for instance, fiction published by presses like Thomas Nelson. My video next Sunday is going to go into why that is, why I'm encouraging people to steer clear of that fiction. Feel free to read any work of literary fiction, contemporary fiction, science fiction. So what am I going to be reading? The first book that I'm going to be reading, my work of fiction, is Brendan by Frederick Buechner. And this is a book that I have owned for a very, very long time, but have never read. One of the reasons why I haven't jumped into it in all these years is that I've never really found the sales pitch for it on the back of the book, the synopsis, terribly compelling. It says, revisioning the inspiration from one of the most popular and enduring medieval legends, Frederick Buechner tells the tale of the colorful 6th century Irish saint Brendan, through the eyes of his loyal friend and follower Finn. This animated vision of Brendan's dynamic path chronicles the Celtic world of 1500 years ago and contains all the complex moral messages that abound in the best mythology. It just feels too general, almost like it was written by somebody who hadn't read the book. So words like colorful, what does colorful mean exactly in this context? This animated vision, right? So I know it's not a cartoon. But as an adjective in this context, animated doesn't tell me anything about what's going on here. Brendan's dynamic path, what does that mean, dynamic path? So anyhow, yeah, I've wanted to read it for a really long time, but never have. And the reason why I have settled on this book for this readathon has to do with this book, Albion, The Origins of the English Imagination by Peter Ackroyd, which I started reading at the end of last year. And I'm not very far into it. I'm only like 120 pages maybe into it. But as I was reading this book in December, I came across this. And let me just read this to you. Another life might be ventured in this context, since it is the first example of, quote, travel literature in English, and as such, represents one of the true origins of the English imagination. The voyage of St. Brendan has been described as one of the great mythological narratives of the Christian West, but it has also been interpreted as an actual account of a sea journey to Newfoundland or Iceland. The Elizabethan magus, John Dee, included the text in his argument that England held original dominion over America itself. It has also been described as, quote, one of the most famous and enduring stories of Western Christendom. Brendan and 14 brethren set out to sea in a coracle of wood and tanned oxhide. After 40 days, they land upon a rocky island where a great hall and miraculous feast appear to comfort them. Yet here the devil, in the shape of, quote, a little Ethiopian boy holding out a silver necklace and juggling with it, comes to tempt them. On another island, they discover herds of giant sheep, and afterwards build their camp upon the back of a great whale. In another place, they encounter flocks of speaking birds who explain to Brendan that they are fallen angels. At the time of Vespers, the birds sing a hymn in praise of God and beat their wings against their sides, quote, as sweet and moving as a plaintive song of lament. On a yet more distant island, they visit an enchanted monastery, and on another, they converse with a man crouching upon a rock who announces himself as Judas Iscariot. It is a delightful story which can be seen as the harbinger of Utopia, Robinson Crusoe, and Gulliver's Travels. It contains the close detail of a journey, complete with leather water bottles and preservative salts, combined with the most extraordinary allegorical intent. It may have been the work of a British or Irish rather than a Saxon monk, but it introduces that line of fanciful or fantastic travel writing which has become so much part of the English genius. So that sold me. That made me think that Peter Ackroyd himself should have written the dust jacket copy for Buechner's novel. So once I got online and confirmed that the Brendan that Peter Ackroyd is talking about in that ancient text is the same Brendan that Frederick Buechner was writing about in his novel, I was like, okay, that's going to be my book for Maybe Midrash. And for my nonfiction, I'm going to be reading He Held Radical Light, The Art of Faith, The Faith of Art by Christian Wiman. Wiman is primarily known as a poet. He was the editor of Poetry Magazine for about 10 years. I've talked about his poetry, particularly his book, Every Ribbon Thing, here on my channel a couple of times, as well as his memoir, My Bright Abyss, which is both about his experience suffering with cancer and also his ideas about religion and faith and the tension between one's ideas of religion and suffering. That's a hell of a book. That might be my favorite work of religious nonfiction. But I haven't read this yet, and I look forward to diving into it. It seems to me that this slim book, it's very, very slim, is going to kind of be a combination of those two things, right? His poetic mind and his religious mind, and remains to be seen if that's what it is or not. And what I think of it, but I do love the idea of exploring the tangle between religion and art, and that seems to be precisely what this book is doing, and it's what this readathon is all about in many ways. One more note about Wiman is that he, like Marilyn Robinson, he is one of these writers, one of these thinkers who, when you read an interview with him or you see an interview with him, you get the sense that his intellect is just absolutely towering, right? Like you want to know what he knows, and you want to just have a taste of seeing the world as he sees it. You just want to know what that's like. He's just an absolutely brilliant man. If I remember, I will try to find either a print interview or a video interview with him to link in the description box below. And then you can just watch it or read it for yourself, and hopefully get something like the sense that I do from him. I would love to meet Christian Wiman, but I think I would be too afraid to say anything for fear of sounding like a blithering idiot. Now, another writer about whom that is true, so when you hear her being interviewed or read her being interviewed, you're just astounded by how wise and how clear-eyed and how intelligent she is. And that writer is Jamie Quatro. And this is my first of the book recommendations for Maybe Midrash. And it is her novel, Fire Sermon, which I read for the BookTube Prize judging last year. This novel is about a married poet and the affair that she has with an academic. It has as much to say about marriage and grace as any novel I've ever read. It also has a great deal to say about religion. There's a passage in the book that I wanted to read to you just to give you a sense of what Quatro's prose is like and how her mind works on the page. Later, in the park, we sat on another bench. So warm out, unseasonable, my feet were swelling in my heels. When I took them off, I was startled for a moment by the color of my toenails, painted electric blue. I'd forgotten. We were talking about God and theology, the delight, the utter joy of speaking with someone who shared the language of my childhood. We discussed sullied words like perfection, how it has retained its original sense, a property of something that has been completed only in music, perfect cadence, and grammar, perfect tense. We discussed the ontological versus cosmological arguments for the existence of God and whether the universe exists in esse, like a house, deism, Aristotle, or in fieri, liquid in a vessel, theism, Aquinas. And St. John of the Cross, how he said we might become sexually aroused in the middle of spiritual acts, such as prayer or communion, because when the spirit is moved to pleasure, it drags the body up with it. We are holistic creatures. It cannot be helped. So basically, any novel that has a paragraph in it like that is a novel that is taking religion very seriously and is treating it very thoughtfully and with great reverence, although not at all in any way, shape, or form kowtowing to it or looking to proselytize for it or flatter it. This is a brilliant, brilliant novel. And like I said, just as with Wiman, when you encounter an interview with Jamie Quatro, her intellect just shines through, it just cuts through the interview like a beam of light. She's so brilliant. And here is a quote that I shared on Facebook quite some time ago. That is from an interview that I read with her. While the tendency might be to avoid literature that still engages with faith, I believe the current moment is a crucial one in literary history for artists of faith who don't identify with the far right, who recognize complexity and doubt as the marks of spiritual viability. That is a writer after my own heart. So the next book I'm going to recommend to you guys for Maybe Midrash is Exiles by Ron Hansen. Ron Hansen is a Catholic novelist from Nebraska. So this is a novel about the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it is in large part about the tension that Hopkins felt, the unsettled tension between his religious vocation and sensibility and his love and genius for a secular art in poetry, and how he struggled, absolutely just struggled to reconcile those two things. It also tells the story of his writing of the poem "The Wreck of the Deutschland" and the Deutschland voyage itself. So this was a ship that wrecked, if I remember right, off the coast of Britain, and it carried among its many passengers a handful of nuns, and it tells the story of those nuns on that journey, and it is an exceptionally powerful and moving novel. Yeah, Ron Hansen is terrific. He's also got a really wonderful book of essays on faith and fiction. And that book is called A Stay Against Confusion. So I would recommend looking for it as well. Exiles, Ron Hansen. And the last work of fiction that I'm going to recommend to you in this video is Tim Winton's short story collection, The Turning. In particular, the title story. Winton is an Australian novelist. He is a novelist here. I wrote this quote down. He is a novelist who once said in an interview, and I'll link this interview down below, he said, "When I'm in the presence of Protestants, I feel like a Catholic. And when I'm with Catholics, I really feel like a Protestant." The way in which religion works its way into his fiction is incredibly subtle, difficult even sometimes to spot. Other times it's much more striking and overt, but it's never preachy, right? And that's part of why I want the people participating in this project to read secular fiction that's dealing with religion, is because it's not interested in preaching to us. It's interested in mystery and in questions, and I love that, and I find that so valuable. But yeah, the title story in this book is one of the clearest and most beautiful articulations I've ever read about, what Jesus can be for someone who has been needing him, whether or not they know it. And it's magnificent. And then the last couple of books I want to recommend to you guys are works of nonfiction. And the first one of these is Walking the Bible, A Journey by Land Through the 5 Books of Moses by Bruce Feiler. So Bruce Feiler is someone who, so I've been talking about, these writers and how they come across in interviews. Bruce Feiler is at the opposite end of the spectrum. He's clearly very, very smart, but his personality in interviews, how it comes across in interviews, is so freaking annoying. I don't know that I could be in the same room with Bruce Feiler for 10 minutes without wanting to throttle him. I actually feel the same way about the screenwriter Aaron Sorkin, who was kind of the creator of The West Wing, and I think he wrote The American President. He wrote A Few Good Men. He's a hell of a writer, but when you see an interview with Aaron Sorkin or with Bruce Feiler, to me anyway, they are just profoundly irritating. Fortunately, Feiler doesn't come across that way on the page. This book is fascinating. It is charming. It is relentlessly curious, and it's engaging on every single page. I was never, ever bored reading this book, and I learned so much. And I learned really new ways of looking at those books of the Bible, right? And the stories therein, and what they might mean, and what historical and geographical context for them might look like. I just find the book wondrous. Really, it's probably the best way I can put it. It's definitely worth your time to read. Walking the Bible. And then the last book I'm going to mention is the memoir by Lauren Winner, and it is called Still: Notes on a Mid-Faith Crisis. And Lauren Winner is also the author of the memoir Girl Meets God, which is probably my favorite memoir of all time. But this one is really, really marvelous as well. It's very, very quiet. It's deeply concerned with words and with reading in a way that Girl Meets God isn't. And it just seems to me it would be a perfect book for anyone who is curious about religious memoir, especially written by someone who is a devoted and extravagant reader herself. So Lauren Winner is one of these people that you're just intimidated by as far as her accomplishments and her mind. She is 1 year younger than me, and I've got these things written down here. She has a bachelor's in history from Columbia, a master's, I think, in history from Clare College, a master's of divinity from Duke, a PhD in history from Columbia. She is an ordained Episcopal priest, and she's the author of, I believe, 8 books. And again, she is 44 years old. To give you a sense of what this book holds, what it contains, and also how it sees the world and the relationship between faith and the world and the act of reading, I wanted to read a quote from it to you that I shared on Facebook last month. So again, right, so this is from Lauren Winner's memoir, Still: Notes on a Mid-Faith Crisis. Scholars debate Emily Dickinson's religiosity. She rejected the strict Calvinism of her day, they say. She wasn't conventional in her piety. I am uninterested in these debates. What I am is jealous. You have to know Jesus well, closely, to call him the giver of the gigantic sum. You must know him well to reach for him with words like tender pioneer. One day, maybe I will know Jesus well enough to ken. So yeah, that's Lauren Winner. And I would recommend, again, either her memoir, Girl Meets God, or Still. They're both just terrific books. If you're planning to participate in the readathon and you haven't let me know yet what books you've settled on or decided on, please do in the comments below if you've arrived at what books you're planning to read in the month of May for this. I will be back next Sunday with my video on why I would like people to steer clear of Christian publishing houses for the purposes of this readathon. And I will talk to you guys again very soon. Adios.